She stood at the window of the rented sedan, watching the rain streak down the glass like tears she refused to shed. Derek had imagined this moment 1,000 times during those 10 years abroad, building his tech empire in Singapore, closing deals in Tokyo, shaking hands with investors who barely knew his wife's name. He had sent money every month, called when time zones allowed, written emails that grew shorter as the silence from home grew longer. Sophia's responses had dwindled from paragraphs to sentences, from sentences to emojis, from emojis to nothing at all. He told himself she was busy, that marriage could survive distance, that love was patient. Now, pulling up to the address she had finally sent him, 3 weeks after he announced his return, patience felt like foolishness. The house before him wasn't the modest 2-bedroom they had purchased together in Pasadena with their wedding gift money. This was a mansion, perched in the Hollywood Hills with a circular driveway, fountain centerpiece, and security gate that buzzed him through after he stated his name. Mediterranean architecture stretched across what had to be 8,000 square feet, maybe more. Palm trees swayed in the January drizzle, and through floor-to-ceiling windows, he glimpsed chandeliers that cost more than his first car. His heart hammered against his ribs as he parked beside a black Range Rover with dealer plates. 10 years of sacrifice, of missing birthdays and anniversaries, of building something he thought was for both of them. And this was what awaited him. The front door opened before he could knock. Sophia stood there, and for a moment, time collapsed. She looked different, polished in a way that money bought, her hair professionally styled, her clothes designer labels he recognized from airport boutiques. But her eyes held the same warmth he remembered, now mixed with something else, something that looked like fear or maybe guilt. "Derek," she whispered, and her voice cracked on his name. "You're early. I thought you were coming next week." Behind her, the foyer gleamed with marble floors and a staircase that curved upward like something from a movie set. He wanted to ask why she hadn't picked him up from the airport, why she hadn't answered his last 15 calls, why this house existed when their mortgage was supposed to be on a starter home in a middle-class neighborhood. "I texted you yesterday," he said, keeping his voice steady despite the tremor in his chest. "Said I'd be here today at 3. It's 3:15. She glanced over her shoulder, a nervous gesture that sent alarm bells ringing through his skull. "Right, yes, I'm sorry. Things have been complicated." Complicated was an interesting word choice for a woman standing in a mansion that hadn't existed in any of their conversations over the past decade. He stepped forward, not waiting for an invitation, and she moved aside, because what else could she do? The interior smelled expensive, that particular scent of new furniture and fresh flowers that money bought weekly. Original artwork hung on walls painted in tasteful neutrals. Through an archway, he glimpsed a living room the size of their old house. Then he heard it, the sound that changed everything. Laughter, high and pure, the kind only children made when the world still felt safe. A little boy, maybe 4 or 5 years old, came running around the corner, his sneakers squeaking on the marble. He had dark curly hair and Sophia's nose, her exact nose, the one Derek used to kiss every morning before work. The boy stopped when he saw Derek, his smile fading into curiosity. "Mama, who's that man?" he asked, reaching for Sophia's hand with the instinctive trust of a child who knew he was loved. "Mama." The word hung in the air like smoke from a fire neither of them could put out. Derek's world tilted sideways. Mathematics didn't require a degree, just basic subtraction. 10 years abroad minus 4 or 5 years of this boy's life equaled a timeline that made his stomach turn. Sophia's face had gone pale, her hand tightening around the child's fingers. "Oliver, sweetie, why don't you go find Cameron and tell him we have a guest?" she said, her voice artificially bright in that way parents spoke when they were lying through practice smiles. The boy nodded and ran off, calling out, "Uncle Cameron," as he disappeared down a hallway that seemed to stretch into infinity. Uncle Cameron, another name that hadn't appeared in any email, any call, any message over 10 years of supposed marriage. "I can explain," Sophia started, but Derek raised a hand, cutting her off. His mind raced through scenarios, each one worse than the last. A child who called her mama, a mansion he hadn't bought, an Uncle Cameron who apparently lived here, and a wife who looked at him like he was the intruder. "Not yet," he said quietly, surprised by how calm he sounded when everything inside him was screaming. "I just flew 17 hours to get here. I think I deserve more than an explanation standing in a stranger's foyer." She flinched at the word stranger, and good, he thought. Let her feel even a fraction of what he was feeling right now. Footsteps approached, expensive shoes on expensive floors, and then a man appeared, tall and confident in tailored slacks and a crisp white shirt that probably cost more than Derek's entire suitcase of clothes. He had silver at his temples despite looking to be in his late 30s, and he moved with the easy assurance of someone who had never questioned his place in the world. "You must be Derek," the man said, extending a hand that wore a watch Derek recognized from a business magazine, something Swiss and 6 figures. "I'm Cameron Thornton. Sophia's told me a lot about you." The smile didn't reach his eyes, and Derek didn't take the offered hand, watching it hang in the air between them like a challenge neither of them wanted to acknowledge yet. Cameron lowered his hand slowly, the rejection registering in his eyes with a flicker of annoyance quickly masked by practiced charm. "I understand this must be quite a shock," he said, gesturing toward a sitting room off the main hallway, where leather furniture cost more than most people's annual salaries. "Perhaps we should all sit down and talk like civilized adults." Derek noticed how he said civilized, as if Derek was the one behaving unreasonably by showing up to his own wife's residence unannounced. Sophia's fingers twisted together, a nervous habit she'd had since college, back when they were poor students sharing ramen and dreams about the future they would build together. The sitting room overlooked a pool area that could have hosted a resort, complete with cabanas and what looked like an outdoor kitchen. Derek sat on the edge of a chair, refusing to get comfortable in this place that felt like a stage set for someone else's life. Sophia perched on the sofa beside Cameron, not touching him but close enough that Derek could see the familiarity between them, the way people sat when they'd shared space for years. "Derek, I know how this looks," Sophia began, but Oliver came bounding back into the room before she could continue, his small hands clutching a tablet that probably cost more than the laptop Derek had used to code his first software program. "Uncle Cameron, can I show the man my game?" Oliver asked, his eyes bright with the uncomplicated enthusiasm of childhood. Cameron's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and he glanced at Sophia with a look that said they hadn't prepared for this particular complication. "Buddy, why don't you go play upstairs for a bit? The adults need to talk," Cameron said, his tone gentle but firm in that way that suggested he'd given this instruction before many times. Oliver's face fell, and something in Derek's chest cracked watching this little boy, this child who existed because his wife had built an entire life without him. "Actually," Derek heard himself say, "I'd like to see your game, Oliver. What are you playing?" The boy's face lit up like Christmas morning, and he scrambled onto the chair beside Derek, small fingers swiping across the screen with practiced ease. "It's about space explorers," Oliver explained, his voice carrying that particular cadence children used when discussing things they loved. "See, this is Captain Nova, and she has to find the lost planets before the bad guys do. Uncle Cameron downloaded it for me last week after Grandma came to visit. She brought me cookies shaped like stars." The mention of Grandma sent another jolt through Derek's system. Sophia's mother, Victoria, had never liked him, had called him too ambitious, too focused on money, ironically the exact traits she apparently approved of in Cameron. Sophia stood abruptly, her composure cracking around the edges. "Oliver, sweetie, why don't you take your tablet to the playroom? Mommy will come check on you in a few minutes." Oliver hesitated, looking between the adults with the intuition children possessed for sensing tension. "Okay," he said slowly, sliding off the chair. "But the man seems nice, Mama. His smile is like yours." Out of the mouths of babes, Derek thought. Watching his wife's eyes fill with tears, she blinked away furiously. The boy left, his footsteps fading up that grand staircase, and silence settled over the room like fog. "His name is Derek," Sophia said quietly, speaking to the space where Oliver had been standing. "You should use his name, not just call him the man." Cameron leaned forward, elbows on his knees, the picture of reasonable concern. "Look, Derek, I'm sure you have questions. Let me try to provide some context that might help." The presumption in his tone, the way he positioned himself as the explainer of Derek's own life, made anger simmer in Derek's gut. I don't want your context, Derek said, his voice low and controlled. I want to hear from my wife why there's a child in this house who has her eyes and calls her mama, and why you're sitting here like you belong in this conversation. Sophia stood and walked to the window, her back to both men, her shoulders rigid with tension. Oliver is my son, she said, the words falling like stones into still water. He's 5 years old. He was born 6 months after you left for Singapore. The math clicked into place with horrible clarity. She had been pregnant when he left, must have known or suspected, and said nothing. All those video calls where she angled the camera just right. All those excuses about being too tired to talk. All those years of silence suddenly making terrible sense. You were pregnant, Derek said, and it wasn't a question. You knew, and you let me leave anyway. She turned then, and her face was a map of guilt and defiance mixed together in equal measure. You were so excited about the opportunity, she said, her voice rising with emotion she'd clearly been holding back for years. You talked about it constantly, how this was our chance, how we'd be set for life if you could just get this company off the ground. What was I supposed to say? Stay home and change diapers instead of changing our future. The accusation hung between them, and Derek felt the weight of it because she wasn't entirely wrong. He had been obsessed, had seen Singapore as their golden ticket, had promised her it would only be 2 years, maybe 3, and then they'd be together again with money enough to never worry. You were supposed to tell me I had a son, Derek said, standing now, needing to move, to do something with the energy coursing through him. You were supposed to give me the choice, Sophia. That's what marriage means. That's what love means. Cameron cleared his throat, a sound designed to reclaim attention. Perhaps I can clarify my role here, he said, and Derek wanted to tell him that his role was exactly the problem. But he stayed quiet, letting the man dig his own grave with words. Sophia and I met at a charity fundraiser about 5 years ago. She was struggling, raising Oliver alone, trying to make ends meet on whatever you were sending. I offered to help. Help was such a convenient word, Derek thought. So vague it could mean anything from paying for groceries to moving them into a mansion and playing daddy to another man's child. Help, Derek repeated, tasting the bitterness of it. Is that what you call this? This house, this life, this family you've built with my wife and my son. Cameron's expression hardened, the charm sliding away to reveal something colder underneath. Your son who you've never met? Your wife who you abandoned for a decade? I've been here, Derek. I've been the one at Oliver's bedtime, at his doctor appointments, at his first day of kindergarten. Where were you? The words hit like physical blows because they contained truth Derek couldn't deny. He hadn't been there, hadn't known to be there, but the result was the same. A little boy upstairs playing video games had grown up calling another man uncle, had grown up in a mansion bought with another man's money, had grown up without knowing his father existed. Sophia, Derek said, ignoring Cameron entirely now, speaking only to the woman he'd married in a small ceremony with borrowed flowers and dreams they'd whispered to each other like prayers. Tell me the truth. All of it. Who is Cameron to you? Who is Oliver's father listed as on his birth certificate? What exactly have the last 10 years been? She met his eyes finally, and in hers he saw something that terrified him more than anger or guilt. He saw calculation, the look of someone weighing options, measuring consequences, deciding how much truth to reveal and how much to keep hidden. Cameron has been very generous to us, she said carefully, each word selected with precision. He's helped with expenses, provided opportunities Oliver wouldn't have had otherwise. As for the birth certificate, your name is on it, Derek. You're listed as the father. Relief and confusion warred in his chest. At least that much was honest. At least she hadn't erased him completely. But something in her tone, in the way Cameron sat there looking almost amused, told Derek there were layers to this story he hadn't begun to uncover. Oliver's voice drifted down from upstairs, singing a song about stars and adventures, innocent and pure in a house that suddenly felt like it was built on secrets and lies. I need to know everything, Derek said, surprised by how tired he sounded, how the anger was giving way to exhaustion. I've built a successful company, Sophia. I've made the money we dreamed about. I came home thinking we'd finally start our real life together, and instead I find this. So tell me, what happens now? Do I just leave? Do I fight for my son? Do I accept that you've moved on? He paused, watching her face for any sign of the woman he'd loved. Or is there something else going on here that I'm not seeing yet? Sophia's carefully maintained composure finally cracked, and she sank back onto the sofa like a marionette with cut strings. You should go, she whispered, but her eyes pleaded something different, something Derek couldn't quite read through the fog of betrayal clouding his judgment. Cameron stood smoothly, buttoning his suit jacket with the practiced motion of someone perpetually ready for the next board meeting. I think that's wise, he said, moving toward Derek with an authority that didn't belong to him. This has been emotional for everyone. Perhaps you could call tomorrow, arrange a proper meeting to discuss Oliver's future. The dismissal was clear, the assumption that Derek would simply comply hanging in the air between them. Derek didn't move. 10 years of negotiating with investors and corporate sharks had taught him when someone was trying to control the narrative, and every instinct screamed that leaving now meant losing something he couldn't get back. I'm not going anywhere until I understand what's happening, he said, his voice carrying the steel he usually reserved for boardrooms. That's my son upstairs. This is still my wife, legally. And you, Cameron, are the interloper here, not me. Something flickered across Cameron's face then, something that looked almost like admiration mixed with irritation. You've got this, he seemed to be thinking, but Derek couldn't tell if that was aimed at himself or some internal calculation about how to handle this unexpected complication. The sound of a car in the driveway drew everyone's attention. Through the window, Derek watched a silver Mercedes pull up, expensive and understated in that way that screamed old money rather than new. A woman emerged, mid-60s with perfectly coiffed blonde hair and clothes that probably came from boutiques that didn't display prices. Victoria, Sophia's mother. Derek hadn't seen her since the wedding, where she'd spent the entire reception telling anyone who would listen that her daughter was making a mistake marrying a man with more ambition than sense. She'd been right, Derek thought bitterly, just not in the way she'd intended. Victoria swept through the front door like she owned the place, and from the way no one questioned her entrance, perhaps she did in some way Derek hadn't figured out yet. Darling, I brought those documents from the attorney, she called out, her voice carrying the practiced refinement of someone who'd spent a lifetime in country clubs. She stopped short when she saw Derek, her eyes narrowing with recognition and something else, something that looked like alarm. Well, she said, recovering quickly, the prodigal husband returns. How inconvenient. The word choice struck Derek as odd, not unexpected or surprising, but inconvenient, as if his arrival had disrupted carefully laid plans. Mother, please, Sophia said, standing again, her hands fluttering nervously. This isn't the time. But Victoria was already settling into a wingback chair, crossing her legs with elegant precision, her gaze moving between Cameron and Derek like a general assessing troops. On the contrary, darling, this seems like exactly the time. After all, Derek has questions, don't you, dear? About how your wife and son came to be living in such comfortable circumstances. The mockery in her tone was gentle but unmistakable. I'm sure you're wondering where all this came from. This lovely home, the private school tuition, the lifestyle Sophia couldn't possibly afford on what you were sending. Derek's mind raced, pieces clicking into place that he didn't want to acknowledge. Cameron's been generous, he said slowly, watching Victoria's face for confirmation of what he was beginning to suspect. That's what Sophia said. He's helped with expenses. Victoria laughed, a crystalline sound that held no warmth. Is that what we're calling it? How delicate. Tell me, Derek, what do you know about community property law in California? About how assets acquired during a marriage belong to both spouses, regardless of who earned them? The shift in conversation felt deliberate, a chess move he couldn't quite counter because he didn't understand the game being played. Cameron moved to the bar cart, pouring himself scotch without offering anyone else a drink. Victoria, I don't think this is productive, he said, but there was warning in his tone, not concern. She waved him off dismissively. The man deserves to know what he's walked into, she said, turning back to Derek with a smile that reminded him of sharks circling prey. My daughter has been very patient these 10 years, Derek. Very strategic. Building a life, establishing residency, creating documentation of Cameron's generous support for a child whose father abandoned them. It's okay to feel overwhelmed, darling. This is complicated. The words hit Derek like ice water. Abandoned. Documentation. Strategic. These weren't words people used about raising a child or surviving a difficult situation. These were legal terms, calculated terms, the language of people building a case. "What are you saying?" he asked, though he was beginning to understand. Pieces of conversations and glances between Sophia and Cameron suddenly taking on new meaning. Victoria leaned forward, her expression almost pitying. "I'm saying that you've built quite an empire in Singapore, haven't you? All those patents, that intellectual property, those investments, all acquired while you were married to my daughter, while she was here raising your son, struggling alone." Derek's chest tightened. He'd been meticulous about his finances, keeping detailed records, sending money home regularly. But he'd also poured millions back into the company, into expansion, into building something that would secure their future. Their future, he'd thought, not realizing Sophia might have other definitions of who that included. "The company is mine," he said, hearing the defensive edge in his voice. "I built it. Every line of code, every investor meeting, every sleepless night. Sophia didn't contribute to that." Victoria's smile widened. "Didn't she? She contributed a marriage, Derek. She contributed being the supportive wife, the one who stayed home, who sacrificed her own career opportunities to raise your child while you gallivanted around Asia becoming a millionaire." "That's not what happened," Derek said, looking at Sophia desperately, needing her to contradict her mother's narrative, to say this was all a misunderstanding. But Sophia was staring at her hands, silent, complicit in her silence. Cameron set down his glass with a sharp click. "The paperwork Victoria mentioned is a proposed settlement agreement," he said, all pretense of friendliness gone now, replaced by the cold efficiency of a businessman closing a deal. "Sophia is prepared to file for divorce on grounds of abandonment. California is a community property state, as Victoria mentioned. Your company, your assets, everything you've built, half of it belongs to her." The room spun slightly, and Derek gripped the back of a chair to steady himself. "This is extortion," he said, the word feeling inadequate for the magnitude of what was unfolding. "This is fraud. You can't just decide I abandoned my family when I was working to support them, when I sent money, when I called." Victoria stood, smoothing her skirt with manicured hands. "Can't we? Let's see. A husband who leaves the country for a decade, who misses the birth of his child, who has no physical presence in that child's life, who provides minimal financial support compared to what Cameron has offered. Meanwhile, my daughter struggles, works part-time jobs, relies on the kindness of a generous benefactor who steps up where the biological father failed." "I didn't know about Oliver," Derek said, his voice rising now, anger overtaking shock. "Sophia never told me. How is that my fault?" But even as he said it, he knew how it would play in court. Ignorance wasn't a defense, and a good attorney could paint him as negligent at best, deliberately absent at worst. Victoria moved toward the door, her exit clearly rehearsed. "You have two options, Derek. Sign the settlement agreement. Give Sophia her fair share of what you built together. Maintain a relationship with your son under terms we find agreeable. Or fight this, drag it through courts, air your abandonment in public records, and still lose in the end because California law is quite clear about these matters." She paused at the doorway, her final words delivered with surgical precision. "Oh, and Derek, you might want to know that my family has been handling matters like this for quite some time. My mother taught me, and I taught Sophia. We have attorneys in Rhode Island and Massachusetts who specialize in community property disputes. We have connections in Maryland and D.C. who understand how to navigate complex financial situations. We have accountants in New Jersey and New Hampshire who know how to trace assets through shell corporations. And we have friends in Hawaii and Washington state where, if necessary, one can relocate quite comfortably while legal matters resolve themselves." The words hung in the air like a threat wrapped in silk. Derek looked at Sophia, really looked at her, and saw not the girl he'd married but a stranger wearing her face. "How long?" he asked quietly. "How long have you been planning this?" She finally met his eyes, and in hers he saw something that might have been regret or might have been nothing at all. "Does it matter?" she asked. "You left, Derek. You chose your company over us. I'm just making sure Oliver and I are taken care of when you leave again." The accusation stung because it held a grain of truth he couldn't deny, but it was wrapped in so many lies he couldn't separate one from the other anymore. Derek spent that night in a hotel room overlooking the Pacific, watching waves crash against the shore while his mind replayed every conversation, every glance, every calculated word from that afternoon. He didn't sleep, couldn't sleep, because sleep meant stopping, and stopping meant accepting what he'd learned. Instead, he made phone calls. First to his attorney in Singapore, a sharp woman named Patricia who specialized in international business law. Then to a family law specialist in Los Angeles whose name Patricia provided. By 3 in the morning, he'd assembled enough information to understand just how deep the trap had been set and how many years it had been baited. The family law attorney, a man named Richard Chun, arrived at Derek's hotel at 6, bringing coffee and a thick folder of documents. "I did some preliminary research last night after your call," Richard said, spreading papers across the desk in Derek's suite. "The Ashford family, that's your wife's maiden name, correct? They have a history. Not criminal, nothing you could prosecute, but a pattern. Sophia's grandmother married 3 times, each marriage ending in divorce with substantial settlements. Her mother Victoria married twice, same result. There are cousins, aunts, a whole network of women who've mastered the art of strategic marriage and profitable divorce." Derek's hands shook slightly as he reached for his coffee. "You're telling me this is a family business?" Richard nodded, pulling out more documents, some printed from legal databases, others from public records. "They're smart about it. They target successful men, particularly those in tech or finance, men who are ambitious and willing to sacrifice personal time for professional gain. They marry, they wait, they document everything. The men often travel for work, sometimes relocate temporarily, and that's when they strike. Abandonment claims, community property disputes, custody battles. They have a network of attorneys across multiple states who help them navigate jurisdictional issues. Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Maryland, D.C., New Jersey, New Hampshire, all places where they've established residency at various times, all places where they have legal connections." Derek felt sick, realizing he'd been a mark from the beginning, a target selected and pursued with precision. "What about Cameron?" Derek asked, remembering the man's cool confidence, his easy familiarity in that house. Richard flipped through more papers, finding what he needed. Cameron Thornton, CEO of Thornton Industries, inherited wealth from his father's manufacturing empire. Divorced 3 years ago, settlement cost him approximately $40 million. He started seeing Sophia about 6 months after his divorce was finalized. Derek's mind raced ahead, seeing the pattern before Richard could explain it. "He's not her partner," Derek said slowly. "He's her next target." Richard smiled grimly. "Or he was, until you showed up. My guess is they had a timeline. Wait until your company went public or got acquired, file for divorce, take half. Then Sophia moves on to Cameron for round 2. Derek stood, pacing the hotel room as dawn began to break over the ocean. But why would Cameron go along with this? If he knows what happened to me, if he's been through a divorce himself, why would he put himself in that position? Richard leaned back in his chair, the posture of someone who'd seen too many variations of human greed to be surprised anymore. Maybe he doesn't know. Maybe he thinks he's different, special, the one she actually loves. Or maybe there's something else, some arrangement we haven't uncovered yet. These families, they're sophisticated. They create layers of complexity to protect themselves. Derek thought about Victoria's casual mention of shell corporations and interstate connections, the ease with which she'd threaten legal action across multiple jurisdictions. "I need to see Oliver," Derek said suddenly, the realization hitting him that in all of this legal maneuvering and strategic planning, there was a 5-year-old boy who'd done nothing wrong, who was just a child trying to understand his world. "I need to talk to my son." Richard held up a cautionary hand. "That's probably not wise right now. Anything you say, any contact you make, it can be used against you. Sophia's attorneys will claim you're being disruptive, that you're upsetting the child after years of absence. You need to be strategic here, Derek. You need to think like they think." But Derek was tired of strategy, exhausted by the realization that his entire marriage had been a calculated business transaction disguised as love. He returned to the house that afternoon, unannounced again, and this time found Oliver playing in the front yard with a soccer ball, a nanny watching from the porch. The woman stood when she saw Derek, her hand moving to her phone with the instinct of someone who'd been given instructions about unwanted visitors. "I just want to talk to him," Derek said, keeping his distance, his hands visible and non-threatening. I'm his father. Please. The nanny hesitated, looking between Derek and Oliver, who had stopped playing and was watching with curious eyes. Mama said you might come back, Oliver said, his small voice carrying across the lawn. She said you might be angry. Derek's heart broke at the idea that Sophia had been preparing Oliver for this confrontation, scripting his childhood around her schemes. He walked slowly toward his son, kneeling on the grass so they were eye level. I'm not angry at you, Oliver, he said, his voice catching on the words. I could never be angry at you. I'm just sorry I haven't been here. I didn't know about you, but that's not your fault. That's on the adults who should have told me. Oliver tilted his head, processing this information with the seriousness children brought to things they didn't fully understand. Uncle Cameron says you live far away, he said, in a place with tall buildings and different food. He showed me pictures on his computer. The mention of Cameron showing Oliver pictures felt invasive, like the man had been curating Derek's life for consumption, controlling the narrative of who Derek was to his own son. I did live far away, Derek admitted. But I'm here now, and I'd like to get to know you, if that's okay. Oliver considered this, bouncing his soccer ball thoughtfully. Do you know how to play football? He asked, using the term the way kids did when they meant soccer. Mama says it's important to be good at sports. Grandma says it builds character. Even in play, Derek heard the echoes of Victoria's influence, the carefully constructed world where everything served a purpose beyond childhood joy. The front door opened, and Sophia emerged, her face tight with worry that might have been genuine or might have been performed for the nanny as witness. Derek, what are you doing here? She asked, moving quickly down the steps toward Oliver. We agreed you would call first. Derek stood slowly, keeping his body language non-threatening, but his voice firm. We didn't agree to anything, Sophia. And I have every right to see my son. She reached Oliver, her hand on his shoulder in a gesture that claimed ownership. You're upsetting him, she said, though Oliver looked more confused than upset. You need to leave. No, Derek said simply, surprised by how calm he felt despite the storm raging inside him. I'm not leaving. I'm not signing your settlement agreement. I'm not playing the role you've written for me in whatever scheme your family has been running. I've hired attorneys, real ones who understand what you're doing, and I'm prepared to fight this in every court in every state if I have to. Sophia's face went pale, then flushed with anger. You have no idea what you're doing, she hissed, mindful of Oliver standing between them. My family has resources you can't imagine. We'll destroy you in court. We'll take everything. Maybe, Derek acknowledged. Or maybe I'll expose exactly what your family has been doing for generations. Maybe I'll find the other men you've targeted, the other families you've destroyed, and we'll build a case that shows pattern and practice of fraud. Maybe your mother's connections in Rhode Island and Massachusetts won't seem so impressive when federal investigators start looking at interstate wire fraud and conspiracy charges. He was bluffing partially, didn't know if such charges would stick, but he saw something flicker in Sophia's eyes that told him she wasn't certain either. You wouldn't dare, she whispered. Oliver tugged on his mother's sleeve, his small voice breaking through the tension. Mama, why are you crying? He asked, and Derek looked down to see tears streaming down Sophia's face. Real ones this time, not calculated or performed but genuine. I didn't want this, she said, and for a moment Derek saw the girl he'd married, the one who'd whispered dreams about the future before her family's expectations crushed them both. My mother, my grandmother, they taught me this was how women in our family survived. How we took care of ourselves because men always left eventually anyway. I thought you'd come back sooner. I thought you'd fight for us years ago, not now when everything is already broken. The confession hung in the air, and Derek realized that Sophia was as much a victim of her family's legacy as he was, groomed from childhood to see marriage as transaction and love as leverage. It's okay to feel trapped, he said quietly, the words meant for her, but also for himself, for the years they'd both spent playing roles they never chose. But Oliver doesn't have to grow up in this. He doesn't have to learn that relationships are about manipulation and money. We can break this cycle, Sophia. Both of us. For him. She looked at their son, really looked at him, seeing perhaps for the first time what they were teaching him by example. A car pulled into the driveway, and Victoria emerged with Cameron beside her, their arrival clearly coordinated. Sophia, get Oliver inside, Victoria commanded, her voice sharp with authority. Derek, you're You're trespassing. Leave now or we'll call the police." But before anyone could move, Oliver stepped forward, his small hand reaching for Derek's. "I want to hear more stories about the tall buildings," he said simply, with the clarity children possessed before adults taught them to see complications. "Please don't make him leave yet, Mama. He just got here." The innocence of the request, the pure desire of a child to know his father, cut through all the legal maneuvering and strategic planning. Sophia looked at her mother, at Cameron, at Derek, and finally down at Oliver's upturned face. Derek watched her make a choice in real time, saw the moment she decided whether to continue her family's legacy or start writing a different story. "Mother, go home," Sophia said quietly, her voice shaking but determined. "Cameron, thank you for everything, but I think I need to handle this myself." Victoria's face hardened with fury. "You foolish girl, you're throwing away everything we've built, everything I taught you." But Sophia was already guiding Oliver toward the house, gesturing for Derek to follow. "Maybe that's exactly what I need to throw away," she said. The path forward wasn't simple or clean. Sophia and Derek spent months in counseling, untangling years of deception and hurt, learning who they actually were beneath the roles they'd played. Oliver grew up knowing both his parents, flawed and trying, choosing honesty over manipulation. Victoria's network eventually faced investigation when other victims came forward, men who'd been targeted and broken by schemes disguised as marriages. The Ashford family legacy ended not with legal victory, but with one woman's choice to say enough, to believe that love could be real if people were brave enough to stop performing it. Sometimes the greatest courage isn't in fighting battles, but in refusing to fight the way others taught you, in breaking cycles that seemed unbreakable, in believing that even broken things can heal if you're willing to do the work. Thank you so much for watching this journey. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button, subscribe to our channel for more powerful family stories, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and drop a comment below telling us what you think. Your engagement helps us continue bringing these important tales to life. Until next time, remember that it's never too late to choose truth over deception and love over manipulation.